My name is Doug Cattani. I'm the perennial crop breeder and agronomist at the University of Manitoba. This is our 10th year in the field with this plant right here. You can see it in here, not as thick as we'd like it. It's intermediate wheatgrass being marketed under the name Kernza, which is organically produced. This field here was attempted to be established last spring, and depending where you were in Manitoba last spring, we either had very good success. We have one person here who's growing it on their farm that had very good success, and we have other people around the province that had success as well. Others, depending on when you got the seed in and how hard you were hit by the drought. I have a set of plots where this is about right, only I don't have yellow flowers. I have purple flowers in mine, Canada thistle. I think I'd take the clover over the Canada thistle, but it was depending where you are, what happened last year and when you got it in, timing of rains, all of those factors interacted. As I said, the crop here is Kernza. It is a perennial, so we seed in 1 year, then we will take our first seed harvest the next year. So last year's growth determines this year's seed yield. He had a lot of competition last year with the sweet clover, therefore his yield's going to be greatly depressed because of that. But that's farming. Nobody has a perfect crop, whether you're conventional or organic, every year. And last year was an extremely challenging spring to establish, especially a perennial. One of the aims of this project is to have it produce grain over a number of years. We made selections of plants that had to yield well for 3 years, successive years, so that we thought we at least have a field that would be good for 3 years. Our experience in the field that produced the seed that this came out of is that 3 years is a reasonable amount of time for grain yield off of it. Hopefully we're going to take it through 6 years and see what it looks like. Most perennial crops do decline over time. Alfalfa seed producers, any of the grass seed producers of perennial grasses that we have in the province, they do decline over time. We're hoping we're going to be able to keep this in longer. And one of our strategies into helping keeping this in longer is to graze it in the fall after harvest. Now, under organic conditions, I'm not sure whether waiting to use it as a stockpile grazing in late October through November, it may be better to graze it earlier, like after harvest, get the minerals and nutrients back onto the field to promote growth, to promote next year's seed yield. That's something we'll have to look at. We do have a large project ongoing right now. That's one of our sites that didn't establish last year, so we had to reseed it again this year, where we're going to graze it as a stockpile grazing in the fall. And we'll look at a conventional system where we will add 50 kilograms per hectare nitrogen as one treatment. We have it interseeded with alsike clover with no other nutrients added. And then we have a straight monoculture with no fertility. We're going to look at the nutrient dynamics within the plants and within the soil from these different approaches. And then we're going to graze them all and look at the impact of the grazing on the subsequent seed yield. So we're hoping to get at some of these questions through this research. Hopefully I mentioned earlier, this is our 10th year only in the field with this crop. We are producing our first cultivar for Manitoba conditions. One of our major issues in the first production year that was the year we had that beautiful March. I don't know if many of you remember 2012. It was gorgeous. Like, it was 22 degrees in, on the 22nd of March maybe. It was amazing spring. Then we had that April 9th, 10th, -9 Celsius. We lost 60% of the materials we had brought in. So we've spent the ensuing 9 years now making selections, getting the best materials out of those that are adapted to Manitoba. Manitoba's always been a bit of a different place. We've had soybeans now really for 4 or 5 years, really good soybeans for 4 or 5 years. People have been working on that since the 60s and 70s. It takes a while to get materials that are adapted, especially to such a harsh climate as we have. We'll be harvesting our first breeder seed off of our field next summer, and then we will be putting that out for tender to seed companies to increase it. I've got enough work to do without becoming a seed producer as well. Mind you, we do produce seed, and we're going to want to eat this. This can be used as a grain. It does have gluten, in case you're wondering. It's just very, very poor gluten for the purposes that we're looking at it. One of the attributes of this grain is that it's a grass, obviously, but because of the seed size, we have a very high protein content. The tests we've run on Manitoba-grown Kernza is 19 to 21% protein. So it does have a fairly high protein. The breeders are going to, and I'm a breeder as well, but breeders are going to get involved. They're going to want to make, instead of a lot of small seeds, they're going to want to increase yield by having maybe a fewer but larger seeds. And what you're going to do is put more starch in it. You're going to drive that protein down. Okay, so not in my lifetime. I'm getting old enough now that I can say that. You will see larger Kernza seeds than what we will have for the next probably 15, 20 years. And then we will start to see bigger and bigger seeds. Wheat has had a 4,000 to 6,000 year head start on Kernza. People have been selecting, whether that's as land races, whatever, for 4,000 to 6,000 years. We've been doing this in earnest since about 2003. There was a little bit of work done in the 80s and early 90s. So we've got a lot of catching up to do to crops like wheat, but we're slowly getting there. In general, this is a fairly thin stand, obviously. In the spring, it comes out of winter into its reproductive growth. So it usually competes very well with weeds if you have a good stand the previous year. I visited the field at Rourke's farm down in Minto earlier this spring, and I didn't see many weeds in that field, and the crop was up about this high at the time, and that was the end of May. So early spring growth, nice, gives you good weed competition. The big thing is getting it established without the weeds in the first place. And Canada thistle is an issue. Many of the legumes are an issue. We've tried it in organic plots with alfalfa, sweet clover, and white clover. The alfalfa completely outcompeted the Kernza. There was no nitrogen being added, so as a grass, it's really at a disadvantage. The sweet clover wasn't as problematic because of its biennial growth cycle, and the white clover was outcompeted by the Kernza. It shaded it out in the spring. So we're now trying alsite clover. We've seen it persist in Kernza fields, but not compete with the plant to the point of reducing our yield. So we're trying different systems of trying to figure this out. We will do some N15 work with the Kernza, the naturally occurring N15. We will look at the amount in the ones with growing with the Alsite clover to see if the legume is passing, maybe a little bit of nitrogen along to the Kernza, and then we have the no fert, no Alsite clover there we can look at how it's doing on those pieces of land naturally. This trial is 50 acres, and if any of you know anything about doing soil work, 50 acres is a heck of a lot of variability. And so we could be having issues with that, but we'll find out over time. But we're trying to get to some of the dynamics of nutrients within the plant so that we can help the producers know when to put on nutrients and why to put them on. Next year we'll be looking for probably another 3 or 4 producers to put out 5 acres or so. We put out 3 this year, 3 last year, and we're hoping for 4 or 5 next year. But yes, we are looking. Actually, we put out 4 this year, I think. I can't remember. This has been a kind of an odd spring of trying to remember what it is you're doing, as you all probably have experienced as well.
Are you just organic and conventional?
We've been doing it both. We've had organic trials. We've actually, I had a trial in with Martin Entz. We grazed it with sheep in mid-September, I think, that year. And the grazing with the sheep did actually help with the seed yield the next year. Now, whether that is removing the foliage of the legumes and having the Kernza do better in the fall, because alfalfa will shut down usually about the end of September, early October, depending on the year. So maybe the sheep gave it an advantage by removing that earlier on and allowing the Kernza to grow. I don't know, but we have tried it. So, you know, we are slowly getting there. It's been, like I said, only 10 years we've been working on this. So we'll get there. I think we're probably 3 or 4 years further along than I had expected when I started. I had said it would be 15 to 20 years to get a cultivar. I think we'll have it within 15 without any issues.
So in the end, will U of M own those genetics?
Yes, they will own the genetics, possibly. I do trade germplasm with people without any major issues. This variety here is different than the one we're going to be, that we're producing.
So it's going to be a name variety?
I think we will have to go that route. Part of that is for quality control from the Land Institute is the group in the US that has patented or registered Kernza as their trademark. They are the ones that have to, if you want to sell it as Kernza, remember Kernza is organically produced. You can sell intermediate wheatgrass for human consumption, that's not an issue. But as Kernza, and there is a premium that will go along with the Kernza name.
So it's a trademark like Camus?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's probably the best way of saying it. And to have an idea of what's going into those fields, that's part of the reasoning for the...
Do people know what Kernza is?
No. It's a made-up name. Pardon me?
Is someone developing a Kernza market in Canada?
Is somebody developing it in Canada? Not yet.
Well, General Mills.
There we go. Look at Dan. Pardon me?
General Mills is interested, aren't they?
General Mills is interested. They put out a run of cereal last year, Cascade Farms? I think that's it. It was some sort of Kernza flake or whatever, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. Limited run. They don't have enough seed. We can produce seed here in Manitoba at levels higher than they can in the US. I think it's better suited to this time of year. Like we're saying 30 degrees, oh man, it's hot. They're talking 45 when it's flowering and trying to produce a seed. And whether that's under droughty. So we do have a slight advantage over, well, we have a big advantage over Kansas where they've started working, but an advantage over Minnesota and North Dakota, just because we are better suited to a cool season grass production area. Conventional systems, as I was going to say earlier, we put on 50 kilos of N per year, and that is it. And we only start after the first seed harvest. So we grow it the first year, usually without any additional N. One of the factors, I guess, is that we have been growing it on our research farms, and we do follow canola, winter wheat, and things like that. So we may have an advantage is that we're getting at nutrients that have leached below those crops, being grown on that land for 20, 25 years. So we may actually be bringing those nutrients back up to the surface. So
if you do want to grow it commercially in an organic farm and we find a decent market for it, how do you see a farmer doing this? Do you see them growing it for 6 years?
I think they can probably get 4 or 5 years reasonable harvest.
So the first crop would be a year later?
Yep, the first year. We do have trials the last couple of years underseeding it to wheat. And we have under conventional and under organic, so no fertilizers, no herbicides under the organic. We have it with herbicides under the conventional, and we will have our first results this year. Winnipeg, I will tell you, where we had a really hard time establishing, will not be good. Carmen will be excellent. 2 different sites, timing of rains when we seeded. Same crew seeding, you can't be in 2 places on the same day. At least we haven't been successful yet. Had to wait. Carmen got the rain the day after we seeded. We had to wait to seed in Winnipeg because of the rain, and then, it's farming. You can't choose when and a clay soil versus a sandy clay loam, being able to get on them, movement of water off the surface, all of those factors go into the establishment of these and being able to get back on the land in a reasonable length of time. So
in an organic system with a 4-year crop, you'd want to have a good green manure the year before.
Yeah, and I think ideally you would like some nutrients going on immediately after harvest. That's the best time. You harvest this. What regrows after harvest gives you next year's crop. Okay, so it is much more a mid-late August fertility versus a spring fertility.
Could you get away with doing some thin compost or something?
Thin compost. I don't know if you could use manure on it or not, but you're putting it on in August. You're not going to harvest again until the next August. There are options on this type of crop. The spring fertility isn't as important as the fall. It can be. If you can tell me how long our growing season is going to be, I can tell you whether you're going to need to put on the next spring. Last fall we had snow on October 11th or 12th. That pretty much shut everything down. There have been years where we've had growth into late November. Those years you'll need maybe some topping up of nutrients in the spring versus our normal year we probably don't need it. So we're learning as we go along. Every year we're collecting data. We finally have figured out that it's a dual induction plant. It needs to go vernalization like winter wheat, but it doesn't begin its reproductive growth until 13 hours day length, which luckily for us is the first week of April. I worked with some people in France last year that thought it was like winter wheat and would begin growing early in the spring. I'll try to talk louder. Hopefully I'm not mucking up their tape too much. And they put on their nutrients when they would for winter wheat, and every weed in the field grew like this. Kernza sat there. Where they didn't fertilize, it out yielded where they did fertilize. And that's because they have to wait for that 13-hour day length to get the upright vertical reproductive growth. And all of the other species that were in that field, the weed species, perennial ryegrass was a big one, reacted as soon as they put on that fertilizer and jumped up and started competing for nutrients more, but also for light, which set back the Kernza crop. So once we finally are learning how the plant grows, we can adapt our agronomic packages to suit the plant that we're trying to produce, not the ones we're
planning to do anything with this in the fall?
of this field. Dan's going to take it out and plant a new field, I think. There's just not enough here, I think, to sustain it over time. Yep. But what I'm seeing here, I actually is pretty good. But this is basically what we saw last year when we were out here in July. There was about this amount. The sweet clover was actually a fair bit heavier than it is this year. But it really did a strong number on the intermediate here. And as I said,
Typical harvest would be like end of July, early August?
probably 10th of August,
Okay.
typical.
Right.
Now we've harvested on July 30th,
Yeah.
and we've done it on the 17th. So year to year, we're trying to figure out all that now. We've got people in France, Belgium, US, and us in Canada trying to look at growing degree days and all of that, and trying to figure out if we can at least provide producers with a best guess, as opposed to, well, we'll have to wait and see. So, but if you can follow, all of our Manitoba meteorological stations give us growing degree days base 0. If you can know when you start counting, 13-hour day length probably, through to harvest, it gives you an idea, and you can watch as things go. Our hot, dry years give us our earlier harvest and our lower yield.
Now,
Go.
if I want to graze this, probably you don't want the cattle any later than the first part of September. You want to get them off?
Well, I think for organic production, no, you can probably have them on through mid-September without much issue, maybe even late September. If you, as I said, if you can tell me when winter's coming, that's going to be the factor. It's that amount of time you have for growth. Through mid-September, I think you shouldn't have any issue, Dan. But we have straight combined, so thicker crop than this, obviously. We've gone by and cut it off, and we're left with, basically what you're seeing here, that animals could easily graze. So
Have you ever tried harvesting with a stripper header?
no, we haven't.
Have others, like, would that work?
Some people have in the US, from what I know. Has it worked? I don't know what they've had for losses for that. Their yields tend to be lower than ours.
What would be like an average yield from a decent stand?
A decent stand, we're probably looking at 1,000 kilos per hectare, which we have had up to 1,400. In the US, the production fields, the good ones have been maybe 800-900. And I've had fields that have been 1,000 over 3 consecutive years. This one, where we got the seed off this, went 1,400, 1,200, and this is the 3rd year. So maybe our breeding has done a little bit of good. I think it's more adapted to Manitoba as a production site than it is for some of the other areas. It doesn't like a lot of water. It can put roots 4 meters, 5 meters into the soil. It will go deep after it. Get it established, it will go down deep after moisture. So drought is actually not as much an issue as flooding would be. Okay, so don't put it in your lowest part of the field. It probably won't do as well. It'll survive, but it probably won't do as well as it would up higher on a.
Does that imply that Saskatchewan's even a better location for it?
I don't know. I found out one of the producers I gave seed to this year is located like a couple of miles in Saskatchewan. I'll find out, but that's eastern Saskatchewan. There's some interest in Saskatchewan and Alberta. I don't have enough seed to provide them. If they get seed from the US, I would worry about its potential for winter loss. Maybe not first year or two. Winter, we don't choose when the bad winters. Actually, it's usually more a bad spring than a bad winter. That causes our issues. One nice thing about our part of the world, we do get snow. It's a rare year we don't get snow, and that acts as a nice insulation blanket for this crop.
If you're grazing it in fall, do you need to worry about, like if you graze it right down, not having the stubble there to catch snow?
If you're, the animals don't take it all the way down normally. If you've swathed, you're still left with that the animals aren't going to do it. They may trample it, but there's no way they're going to try to eat that straw when they have leafy material. And if you're grazing it earlier in the year, you will get regrowth. Fall moisture will be a big key into the amount of regrowth you get. So a wet fall, this doesn't mind. Actually, it would prefer it. But most of our perennial grass seed crops that we grow for forage seeds or whatever, they all prefer wetter falls than drier falls.
So again, the grazing.
Yep.
What's the benefit of grazing?
Getting the nutrients back on where they are. If you're waiting to as a fall a fall stockpile graze, that leaf material is just going to go down anyhow. It's not going to be there next spring, right? This is a herbaceous perennial. It doesn't need that material for regrowth the next year. So the animal can utilize it and recycle the nutrients somewhat. So, and
They also put them in little piles here and there.
yeah, you may have to go through and break those up, or train them better. I'm joking.
Grazing management.
But the probably another reason for doing it is that this isn't going to give you the same yield that wheat or another grain is going to give you. Having the animals on here gives you value through the animal from that material.
Does the grazing in any way is it likely to give you more yield of Kernza the next year or not?
Where we graze it with sheep, so
Maybe pull out a weed or something like that.
well, no, I think what it did is it helped keep the other plants low down, especially the alfalfa, because we had it interseeded with alfalfa, sweet clover, and white clover. We did see about a 200 kilo per hectare, if I recall correctly, increase in yield in the Kernza the following year.
Like you think if you didn't touch it at all and keep the animals off it, it's going to have more regrowth growth.
Potentially, yep. But conversely, if you stockpile graze it, that means you're grazing it at the end of the season. It's not going to grow anymore at that point. You know, so there are different strategies that you could use. I think under organic, getting those nutrients back on to get the regrowth is probably more important, maybe, than letting what you have sit there. It is better. Okay, the year of establishment is the critical. After that, because it comes out of winter going into its reproductive growth and it elongates quite quickly, it helps suppress other weeds. The first year we go in and we just mow off weeds. We mow them off so that they don't spread seed back on, probably 3 mowings in the year at most. And then in the fall, you'll just see the intermediate come up through those, green foxtail is a warm season grass. You get into that nice frost in September, they're shutting down. These cool season grasses are loving it. And so you will see them emerge. You'll go, oh, there is actually grass there.
And have you
We have establishment experiments out right now, actually.
Generally, you're drilling it in like early May.
We've got we have an experiment with an early May, late May, early August, late August seeding.
Yeah.
We have it with mowing and then just letting the weeds take over. We have a conventional where we're putting on a herbicide as well. We're underseeding to wheat and seeding alone. So we have a number of different scenarios that we're trying to work out what's best for us. Right now, I would say spring seeding, regardless of the timing, is better than fall for seed yield. And I think spring seeding, we get fewer perennial weeds. They tend to, most of the perennial grasses and things like that like to germinate in that August, September. I think it competes better with the perennial weeds when seeded in the spring. Canada thistle has been our bane, and I would say sweet clover, alfalfa would also be ones that could be quite competitive. We're learning.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say we have all the answers. We have some ideas. We have some inklings, but we don't have answers.
I've always heard it's not for bread because of the protein
Oh.
content, but the protein content you're saying is very high. It sounds like it would be ideal for pizza.
People are making sourdough breads with it. Some are blending it with wheat. I've heard up to 50-50. So
Tallgrass loves it.
Tallgrass Bakery loves it. We're trying to get production for them. They would take it in a heartbeat, I think.
It's lower in gluten, you said. So that's
Well, it's not necessarily lower in gluten. It's just really poor gluten.
different.
Yeah, it's
Why the sourdough part.
yeah. That's why sourdough is a better bread with it. I would. We'll see what happens. We're going to have 40 odd acres next year harvested. Maybe I can give some to Dan to mill for tall grass next year. That's my plan. I don't need that amount. It's not of a variety that we're going to release. It can be eaten. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying that from productivity and genetic control and quality control, the new variety is better than this one.